Hi, Tom.
Hello. All right.
Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast. Um, I know a little bit about you, but for the listeners, could you please tell them your name and what it is you do today?
Yes, my name is Tom Armstrong, and I work in fashion marketing. I've been freelance for best part of 10 years. I now work full time at an independent menswear brand called Hamilton and Hair. Um, Before this, I had a print magazine called The Move. Before that, I was editor of an online website called Sabotage Times. So a bit of journalism, bit of marketing, do shoots, editorial. That is the long-winded way of telling you what I do.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds exciting. Um, Now, before we get into the kind of nuts and bolts of how you got to there, um, what are your memories of secondary school?
Quite liked school. I went to school in Hymes Park, which is like northeast London,
Mhm.
um, and I quite liked school. The I was quite a capable student, but I found concentration quite difficult. Um, and but generally, as far as a state school in East London goes, it was pretty good. There was a good mix of people. um, I think when you go out to the sort of suburban areas of London, you do tend to get quite a wide scope of different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, so it was a kind of a good start to life in that respect, because it put you in a group with lots of different people, all different from you, some similar to you. You just kind of had to get on with people. um,
Yeah.
so I think, in that respect, I really enjoyed it. um, I wasn't ever really University never really appealed to me. I sort of left school. I did one term of A levels and
Yeah.
just decided it wasn't for me. Once I got to 16, all I really wanted to do was go out and earn money, to be honest. And doing another couple of years at what seemed like school to me was just, I wasn't interested. Um,
Yeah.
but there was
And
never gone.
but so um lots in there. First thing I wanted to ask you, when you talked about actually there was a big mix of people at your school. So was there a mix of, I guess we said like working class kids and kids from professional, like where their parents were professionals, middle class kids? Was it a
Yeah,
wide mix?
yeah, there was actually. And I guess you get that in the suburbs because you're only 10 minutes from inner city, and then if you go 10 minutes the other way, there's a lot of what I guess in the area that I grew up in northeast London, a lot of kind of new money, a lot of self-made people,
Yeah.
that made money from kind of non-academic means, whether that's
Yeah.
with a trade or um, whatever. But so there was kind of a mixture of different socio-economic backgrounds.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's a good thing because
Yeah.
it held me in good stead for life, until I started working. I'm jumping forward a little bit, but until I started working in the media, and I realised actually I hadn't really met proper posh people. That come a lot later in life. But yeah,
Yeah.
get to that. Yeah.
Um, so you would have been, you did GCSEs, is that
Yeah,
right?
I did GCSEs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And what did you take? Can you remember?
I took history. I really
Yeah.
liked history, and I took food,
Yeah.
but history was the main one. History was the one that I really loved. And I
Yeah.
kind of found with school that if I applied myself to something, I could do really well, and I found it quite easy. And especially if I had a good relationship with the teacher, which I did in history. I had a brilliant teacher called Mr. Davis,
Yeah.
and he just knew how to get the best out of people. He knew how to
Yeah.
engage with students. And I did well in history. I got an A, and I loved it. Really looked forward to it. In other
Yeah.
subjects that I weren't particularly great at, and I didn't have such a good interest in, I
Mm.
didn't do well. In fact, I'm not even sure I went to the exam for some of them just because
Yeah.
I was so uninterested. And and I remember at school, and I do remember it's like speaking to teachers and saying, I'm never going to need this knowledge
Yeah.
in real life. I'm never going to need to understand the inner workings of physics or long
Yeah.
division. So why do
Yeah.
I here and learn it? And honestly, 30 years later, no, I mean not 30 years later. 15 years later, obviously I wasn't very good at maths. I I still I still don't really know why I had to learn that stuff. I don't know. But
Yeah,
yeah, but that's another story. Funnily enough, I'm really into physics now, but all the stuff like, just as a passing interest, as in I watch Brian Cox documentaries on TV.
yeah,
Now, like all the stuff that I'm interested in now, I sort of picked it up later on in life when the time was right. So,
yeah.
sitting learning stuff like that at school just didn't interest me.
And there is that sense of when I went to look around my kids' school, and I'm in there going, "Oh wow, look at this art, and look at this, and isn't the history department amazing?" And I would have done so much better if I'd have gone to school now. So yeah, yeah. And I read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. I mean, it took me 3 weeks on holiday, which is like going back 12 pages. But at school, I'd have had no interest, like in quantum physics, certainly. Um, so the A levels, was that staying on at sixth form at your existing school? Was it just expected that you would do that?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was expected.
Okay.
Like I say, a lot of people in the area that I grew up had done well in
Mm.
life through non-academic means.
Yeah.
So it was never, the academic route was never sort of forced onto you. And in fact, a lot of
Mm.
the time, it was almost looked down upon a little bit, because it was like, well, you're 16 now, you can go out and earn money. Why do you want to stay at school? You
Yeah.
should be going out learning a trade, or doing
Yeah.
something with your time. So why would you want to bother staying on?
Yeah.
So it wasn't expected. I kind of
Mm.
just did it because I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
I stayed on, yeah, because I hadn't found a job, and as soon as I did find a job that accepted me full time, I
Yeah.
left. That was it.
And this really interesting point that you make there, because I think there is that cultural element that you touch on, where actually, if you're surrounded by people who have been successful on, as entrepreneurs, or they've got a trade, they've built their own businesses, then that's kind of, I guess, the expectation or the role modeling. And I am fascinated, and I wonder how much of things like government policy doesn't, it's always designed to erase some of that. I
Yeah.
wonder, with this emphasis on there is a set route to success. Do you think?
Well, yeah, I do think that, and I think that it's a really curious thing that we put so much weight on people to make really important life decisions at 16. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think there really needs to be, I think young people need to understand that the decision that you make about university and A levels when you're 16,
Mm.
that they can, you're not, how can I put this? So it really feels like when you're 15, 16, choosing your GCSEs or your A
Mm.
levels or whether to go to university, that those decisions are going to stay with you for the rest of your life, and they're
Yeah.
irrevocable. And
Yeah.
there's so much pressure on you to make the right choice when you've only been on the planet for 16 years. You don't have you've got no clue.
Yeah.
And actually, the biggest thing that I've learned is that everything is reversible and people are adaptable. And if you make what feels like the wrong decision, you can correct it. And
Yeah.
that adaptability, I think young people would do really well to be told that, and just be like, you can relax a little bit. If you feel like
Yeah.
going to university, maybe it's the right thing. Crack on,
Yeah.
go for it. You
Yeah.
you can be a student. You can choose to go to work and then go be a student later on in life if you like. There's
Yeah.
other options.
Yeah. And I wonder, and it feels like some of that has been taken away because you have to stay on now. You have to have some form of education till you're 18. Um, and I think that is a challenge for a lot of young people, where they're like, why can't I just get a job?
Yeah. Like I read last month that the government are thinking about taking the student loan away, or access to the student loan,
Mm.
for students who don't get English or maths GCSE,
Yes.
which is, I guess their reasoning is that people are getting into too much debt for what they see as low quality degrees.
Yeah.
But what it actually does, I think, is blocks access to lots of entry level jobs for potentially really creatively gifted students who might not be as academically capable or even interested academically,
Yeah.
traditionally academically. And it cuts a lot of jobs away for those people because you have to have a degree to get into a lot of those jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, the answer to that is just deprioritize degrees in especially in the creative industries, because you really don't need to have a degree to do a lot of, well, especially in the career that I've had. Nobody's ever asked me even what I got for GCSEs.
No.
I don't, I've never, it's just not important. I think that what is important is that you show willing and passion, and
Yeah.
the opportunity should be there for you to develop your potential. This idea that you have to have a degree to do something creative, it's just nonsense.
Yeah. And so I guess that kind of brings us to thinking about how, and I know kind of from looking at some of your work that you've worked on campaigns for some extremely large and well-known sportswear brands. How did you get to do that? So you talked about adaptability, getting along with people. What was your first step into building out your career as a creative?
So I started quite late in life, in the media. I didn't start till I was 23.
Oh,
Before
so
that, I know, before I was just doing odd jobs. When I left school, I worked in a designer clothes shop
yeah.
near, which is, I really loved that because I wanted to work in fashion. I'd always loved clothes. I didn't
Yeah.
really know how you would do that. You know, I had absolutely no idea how somebody would work in that industry, but I sort of worked out that if I worked in a designer clothes shop, then maybe I could kind of be around in that environment, and I
Yeah.
would meet people and I'd learn a little bit about the industry. So that was sort of my
Yeah.
way in for retail. Then I went abroad for a few years, went to Greece, and I did odd jobs, worked in a pub, worked in a
Yeah.
pawnbroker's, just sort of like odd job retail stuff. I wasn't really that interested and wasn't thinking of a career. All I was really thinking about was going out at the weekends, and like I was big into clubbing and music and clothes, and
Yeah.
that is actually all I cared about.
Yeah.
Like the idea of a career, just, I was not interested. I was too young. I was having fun.
Yeah.
And I got to 23, and I thought to myself, okay, not that young anymore. Although it sounds silly now saying that back, but at the time it felt like, okay, I'm not a teenager. I'd need to
Yeah.
start thinking long term. What can I do?
Mm.
So I thought, well, I knew I was pretty good at writing because I'd always been good at writing essays at school, and if I was passionate about a subject, I could form an argument pretty well, and I
Yeah.
thought I'd write in an engaging way. So I said, well, I could write about the things that I love, clubbing, music, and I, you know, I could email websites and see if anybody will publish my work. So that's
Yeah.
what I did, and people did start to publish stuff. So I
Yeah.
built a little portfolio and I got a little bit of confidence, but I still did, I had no idea about the industry.
Yeah.
So I got an unpaid internship. So I did that for 6 months,
Yeah.
at like a online magazine. Um,
Okay.
did that, then from that got a job,
Yeah.
then just slowly built my way up.
Mm.
Then how I got into doing marketing, I worked out like after a few years that there seemed to be more money in doing content for brands
Yeah.
than for publishers, because ad revenues were kind of really going down.
Yeah.
It was becoming more and more difficult to earn money from just sort of traditional journalism and feature writing, whereas
Yeah.
brands suddenly wanted to become publishers. So they were paying for content.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
so
really good point. Can I ask you one quick question there? You said that your internship was unpaid, which is just, when you think, oh, no, it's also the experience. So how did you manage to pay your way through that? How did you live?
so the first thing is lucky. I was living in London, so I could live at home on not
Okay.
very much money because I'm from London. If I
Yeah.
wasn't from London, forget about it. There's no way I could have done it
Yeah.
because I wouldn't have been able to afford to get there and back,
Yeah.
or to live in London.
Yeah.
but they paid my expenses, but the expenses weren't enough to cover my travel. So
Right.
I was working on a Sunday
Yeah.
um, to pay for the travel to get in, and
Okay.
I was signing on the dole.
Yeah.
But I remember at the time, I asked the dole office, look, I've been offered this internship, unpaid internship, and I think it's going to lead to a job. And they were like,
Yeah.
you're not allowed to do it because because the time that you are spending working at this
Yeah.
internship, you should be at home looking for jobs. I mean,
Right.
what kind of a backward way of thinking is that? I'm actually
Yeah.
actively out there putting myself about and gaining experience and meeting
Yeah.
people, and inevitably it led to a job. But
Yeah.
up to the job centre, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I'd been sitting at home with a Metro and a marker pen circling bloody jobs. I'd still be there now, probably. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So, so that's how I sort of, with combination of the dole money
Yeah.
and working on a Sunday,
Yeah.
that that was just about covering my overheads and giving me a little bit of money to go out at the weekend.
Yeah. It is crazy, isn't it? Because there is an element of, as you say, you were creating your career and building that network, honing your skills, showing what you were capable of to the kind of people that you wanted to work for. And if you'd have gone and done A levels or something like that, that would have been okay. But this wasn't in the context of, yeah, what you can claim job seekers allowance for or whatever. That's just mad, isn't it? Like I said, it is, you were doing exactly what the government would like people to do, get on your
Yeah.
bike, you know.
You know what it is?
Oh,
It's just that computer says no thinking.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It is completely rigid of like, no, this
yeah,
is what you're meant to do. This is how it's got to be done, and you're
yeah,
not allowed to think outside the box and create your own opportunities. You've just got to follow this path, and that's that.
yeah. That's mad. So how long were you at the place where you did the internship for?
I was there for 6 months, and then they offered me a job
Yeah.
because I think they were just fed up of me hanging around. I mean, start paying this kid, and
Yeah.
because I like it was funny because I was doing an internship with probably half a dozen other people who were all younger than me, who had all come out of university. But
Um,
I knew that I didn't really have I didn't have a lifeline. So
yeah,
if this didn't go well, I had nothing to fall back on. So I really
yeah,
had to grab it with both hands. So I was there early morning, last one to leave at night, properly and just proper grafting because
mm,
that was my lifeline. And I think
mm,
that they kind of saw that. Well, I
yeah,
know that the person that gave me the job was brilliant. Lowry, her name was,
mm,
and I'm sure that she saw that kind of drive and passion and thought, you know, we've got to get this kid on board. Um,
yeah,
I was very lucky that she did, and I think throughout my whole, especially in my early career,
mm,
sort of owe a lot to just people seeing that drive and taking a chance on me because I didn't have that degree or the qualifications or the bit of paper that says that you can do a job. I just sort
mm,
of was going on passion and not really, and having no idea about protocol or etiquette or the industry, and sort
yeah,
of just relying on people seeing a bit of ambition.
yeah. And I guess something that you touched on, it's that ability to get on with other people and put yourself out there. Were there any examples of, you talked about sort of protocol, etiquette? Are there any moments where you look back and think, I can't believe I did that?
Yeah, loads. Yeah, loads. I can't. Yeah, I mean, none. I can't think of any that spring to mind right this second. But I think what you said is right. That like I sort of came from a culture where it was all about your character and how you got along with people, and that's really
Yeah,
kind of how you made your way in life. Was
yeah,
making connections and just kind of being somebody that people like being around and being
yeah,
fun and full of life. And I sort of grew up in the 90s
yeah,
in East London where it was a really sort of time. There was a lot of new money about, and
yeah,
the culture was just very fun and living your life and having disposable income.
yeah,
And and that would like, I think that those kind of characters that I was around who would come
yeah,
out of the East End, made a little bit of money,
yeah,
and just living their best life. I think that sort of that rubbed off on me, and I saw that they just used their personality and their sort of charisma to get on in life. And I think I
Yeah.
definitely took that into my professional life,
Yeah.
because I knew, like, I didn't have the qualifications to fall back on.
Yeah. And where did it kind of take you then? Because you said it really changed when you got into media proper.
Yeah.
How did that work out?
Well, I think the biggest difference that I noticed is when I sort of jumped from doing journalism
Mm,
into sort of the journalism marketing, sort of more into the marketing area. I
mm,
sort of noticed that the people and the atmosphere changed. It
mm,
became it became a lot more professional,
mm,
um, and I've a lot more upper middle class,
yeah.
uh, and I started to really feel a bit like a fish out of water.
Mm,
Whereas the people I was working with before in journalism had all been, um, pretty open-minded, liberal, and just really took people for what they were.
mm,
Um, and I found the environment when I went into marketing to be quite different.
yeah.
Like I say, a lot more professional. And if
Mm,
you hadn't, I've really noticed, I never noticed before that I didn't have a degree, or that I had a sort of a non-traditional background. Whereas in the marketing and the agencies and that kind of world, you sort of did notice more, because there were just, nobody had a regional accent, or very few people had a strong regional accent, or
yeah.
cultural references that you just didn't get, or
Yeah.
like talking about schools and holidays and things like that that you didn't really get, that just reinforced that idea that maybe you don't belong here, because
Yeah.
they've all studied and got a degree and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah, I think when I made that move into the marketing world,
Yeah.
although I was lucky that I worked with some really lovely people and
Yeah.
great smaller agencies, who gave me opportunities to reach my potential and really supportive.
Mm,
Um, I definitely did notice. What, the bigger, like the bigger agencies, definitely, like the bigger
mm.
agencies were a lot more culturally homogenous, I would say.
And something that intrigued me was the fact that where you've got lots of big agencies, like street culture is, very popular. And if you look at the way like KFC do their marketing, for example, I imagine some of that comes from a very big agency. And so I wonder if there is an element of you've got like one kind of more homogenous group of people using the culture of the majority of people to
Yeah,
sell to them. Do you see sort of where I'm getting? It doesn't feel quite
definitely.
right.
And I did have, like, yeah, I certainly experienced a level of internal conflict,
Mm,
for that reason. And one thing that I noticed was that, talking about working class creatives,
yeah,
those that industry is getting a lot better at giving opportunities to freelancers from non-academic or working class
yeah,
backgrounds, whether that's photographers, videographers,
yeah,
but what they really won't do is give the desk jobs, the client facing jobs, the
yeah,
money jobs, the stable money. Those,
yeah,
they only go to the people who are like them, who have got that polish, and that
yeah,
sort of social training. Um,
yeah.
and I'm not. I don't think that's always a conscious thing. I don't think
No.
they all sit together in a room and think, right, how can we keep working class people out of this industry? I just think it's an unfortunate consequence of unconscious bias that has been unchecked for a very, very long time. But optimistically, I think that is starting to change slowly.
Yeah.
There are more conversations now in the media, even in the last year, about
Mm,
social equality and accent bias than I've ever seen in my professional life, and hopefully it actually leads to proper change.
yeah. And I think let's talk about common people actually, because the reason I came across you was because I follow, like social mobility is a big thing for me and I speak about it, and it came up on LinkedIn that you are a founder member, if I've got this right, of Common People. Can you explain what that is about?
Yeah, so Common People is a network for people working in the creative industries who have got experience of being from a working class background. And it started with a friend of mine, Jed Hallam. We were chatting one day, a statistic had come out that only 16% of people employed in full-time positions in the creative industries are from working class backgrounds. And we were talking about, how shocking and disappointing and frustrating that is. And he realised he was having the same conversation with lots of other different people, but there was actually no way of all of us chatting to each other about it. And we'd all said, we feel like the odd ones out, or we feel like we're the only people out there. But it wasn't the case. There were more of us out there. We just needed a way of connecting. So Jed came up with the idea of putting everybody in a WhatsApp group and basically just seeing what happened. What happened was everybody had a friend or a couple of friends that also were from that background. So they added people in, and then they added people in. And within like 48 hours, we'd outgrown the maximum size of a WhatsApp group. So we had to move to Slack. And then we had, I think by the end of the week, we had like 500 people, from uni grads to people leaving school to CEOs, founders of like businesses and charities, right across the board in all the creative industries. So it became a really positive, almost, life affirming, reassuring thing for a lot of people. And then people started sharing jobs and, asking advice. And people said, I've never, X, Y, Z's happened to me at work, and I've never had anybody to ask, is this normal, or what do I do in this situation? And I'm not just talking about young people either, people who are like really in a quite advanced stage of their career. And, people have made really good friends out of it. So that was like just over a year ago. We just done some merchandise through Everpress to raise money with the 93% Foundation, which is a social mobility charity. So, it's going well. It's going really well at the moment.
And when you talk about like the creative industries as a whole, what would you break that down into? Because I immediately go to media, but what other kind of sectors would you put in there?
When I think creative industries, I think TV, film, advertising, music, publishing, and each one of those has got its own specific problems. But I think in general, they tend to fall under the same umbrella. I'm sure there are more that I haven't thought of.
And it's quite I found that like statistic quite shocking. At first, like 16%. Oh my God. And then I was reflecting on what you said, like with journalism, for example. I've got a friend who's a journalist, and it took him so long to become established. I don't know, 10 years or so. But he had a level of support that I couldn't have had, for example. And it did sort of highlight to me how in a lot of those industries, so much of it is not well paid, or it takes you a decade just to get your name in front of the right people, that if you don't have a safety net or a support network, well, then how are you supposed to find your way in?
No, definitely. And I think like I mentioned earlier, when it became harder and harder to get ad revenues from writing, one consequence of that is that it becomes less well paid, and it leaves out loads and loads of people. And that isn't just journalism, that's across loads of the creative industries. If the money's not in it, then it becomes attractive, or even just prohibitively, like, it's impossible. How can you do it? It's impossible if you're not earning money that you have to pay to live in London, like where the centre of the industries tend to be. How can
And what kind of things? So you said like Common People's got a network that people can use to get to know one another and feel like they're not on their own, and you've been sharing jobs, and I read a piece in the Drum where you were featured. And have you got some kind of and you're working with the 93% Foundation? Where when next do you think Common People could go? What other things do you think it could do?
Well, I don't know. I really I think the more members that we have, the better it is for everybody, because you realize what a sizable group you're a part of, and everybody pulling their experience and expertise and contacts, and only do amazing things. I think long term, what I really want is to sort of change the conversation from like, how can we be allowed into these industries, or how can we get a leg up into these industries, into more of a headspace of like, we don't need approval, we don't need anybody's help, we can actually do it ourselves, because there's loads of us, we've got great talent, we've got contacts, and all right, if these industries won't let us in, then we'll just do it ourselves. If we can't get jobs in these companies, we'll start our own companies, and so that people can't ignore us. And I would really like I'd like stuff like that to start happening.
And
to do their own thing.
And I saw an example of that from your work, where you said you started up a magazine yourself. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think it was a really great story in that. So
in 2016, I started a magazine called The Move, which was like club culture, fashion, music, all the things that I love. And I sort of decided to do that because I was becoming a little bit disenfranchised with online media. It was becoming harder and harder to build up a relationship as an editor with your audience, because traffic was so transient with the rise of social media. Everybody was just kind of, they'd see a link to your website, they'd be in and then they'd be out again, without ever really remembering who the publisher was. So I decided maybe I'd try something that gave me a stronger connection to a smaller amount of people, and maybe that would be a little bit more fulfilling than just chasing traffic with bloody cat videos or whatever. Whatever the social media platform was choosing to push that month, you had to alter your content strategy to suit them. And I thought, well, no, I don't really want to do that, thank you. So I'll do a magazine then. So it was good. We did it for 6 issues, and I learned a lot. I really enjoyed doing it, and I really did love having those stronger relationships, because if people have bought something for at whatever a magazine costs, £5-10, they're going to spend more time with it. They're going to have a stronger relationship with it, because they want to get something back from their investment. And I love the fact that when someone bought the magazine, I could write it was me writing their address on the envelope and sending it off to them. You don't get that kind of connection on a website. Right, you might get 1 million people might read an article, but you can't actually chat to any of them about it. Or people might leave comments, but people telling you don't know what you're talking about. But when people buy a magazine, they like it, and you get emails and Instagram messages. You can make friends, and you can see the mag in people's homes, and that was so much more fulfilling to me. I loved it, man. But COVID, unfortunately, COVID and burnout really, because I was doing 2-3 issues a year. They were 100-page issues, because I wanted to give people value for money, and I knew that the difference with the internet, people don't pay for, generally, nowadays there's paywalls and things, but at the time they were less common. So it was kind of all about free traffic. And I thought if people are actually going to buy something, it's got to be of really, really good quality. It's got to be a lot better than what they can get for free online. So the resources that I had to put in, and I'm just talking about time and brain power to maintain that level of quality over 6 issues was difficult. It's really hard on a small budget as well. So I was feeling a bit burnt out. And then when COVID came, obviously all the printing presses shut, and we had no way of distributing the mag, because the record shops that we sold it in were closed. And there wasn't anything to write about, to be blunt. So I just decided to knock it on the head. But I
Mm.
still love print journalism. Love it.
Yeah. And you also did there was the retro store campaign that you did as well, because I love the idea of, like you said, in a world full of cat videos, you making something that is still physical,
Yeah.
it's person to person interaction, and that still lands really well.
Yeah, the store was a brilliant project that I did with Adidas and Mondial, who Mondial is a football magazine
Yeah,
and creative agency. What we did, the Adidas were re-releasing a trainer that had come out in the 70s or the 80s.
mm,
We had to think of a way of making it exciting because there are new trainers released every day now. So
yeah,
how do you get people talking about just, what could just be another trainer? So we decided to create like an old school sports shop,
yeah,
like an old independent sports shop with like
yeah,
tennis rackets and those, the neon stars with
yeah,
stuff on it. And we thought we took over a shop for a week, and just like created this whole like immersive thing, bought like old props from eBay, old footballs, and got AstroTurf on the floor. And when
yeah,
people went in, then they would see on the wall it was all these new Adidas trainers. So then it sort of clicked. Oh, this is a thing. But
yeah,
that was a really, really fun project to work on. I wish I could do more stuff like that, because the brand, we did it with a shop called Hannon, who were
yeah,
based up in Scotland, and they gave us green light. They were like, do whatever you want.
yeah,
Sometimes people can be really precious about their logo or their brand. They were just like, nah, do whatever you want. So we had like flyers made up like an old sports shop advert that you might see in the back of a newspaper.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, it was really fun. I'd like to
Nice.
do more stuff like that, fun stuff. I think that's what's lacking. That's definitely been lacking in it. I've noticed because I grew up in the 90s, right?
Yeah,
When it was all about being fun and
yeah,
having a laugh
yeah,
and I think that's been lacking from the media and advertising and publishing
mm,
definitely recently. Just doing things because it's fun and it makes people laugh and it's a good idea. That's it. Just do it. Just spend a bit of money and crack on.
and how do you, so and this is what it feels to me, kind of like you built your career. You said like at school you're like, well, I did the stuff that really interested me, when I was engaged with it, that was when I excelled, and then you kind of took that into your apprenticeship, and actually into your first job. You're like, great, music, fashion, clubbing, excellent. So you've managed to take all the things that you love and build a career that traditionally people might say, well, you only get to do that if you've gone down the university route. Um, what do you think it is that has put you in good stead throughout that time?
I think always having your antenna on,
Yeah,
having your radar on for
yeah,
opportunities.
mm,
Uh, just being able to create your own opportunities, I think, is a really important skill. Um,
yeah,
when there aren't any, you could just sit behind a desk for 30 years at the same job, waiting for someone else to give you a pay rise or a promotion. Or,
yeah,
I mean, but life, it don't always work out like that. Sometimes you've got to just go out there and get your own thing, do your own,
yeah,
and make your own luck a little bit.
yeah.
So I think that is probably one skill that has helped me. It's funny, right? Do you know what? I'm looking at my cat, talking about cat videos. Yesterday, she came in. She had a bit of toast that she found in the garden, right?
Okay.
And I was thinking, we give you food, right? We give you breakfast and dinner every day. But she was a stray. We got her as a stray, right?
Yeah,
And and I thought to myself, well, she obviously learned when she was young that
yeah,
she had to go out and find her own food, and she had to go and raid through the bins and
yeah,
get toast or get her like fish bone or whatever it was. So she learned them skills as
yeah,
a young kitten, and she's still now. She's 2 years old. Yeah, she gets food. We give her food in her bowl, but she still goes out there and gets toast and brings it back because she's. Do you know what I'm saying? And I actually thought to myself, I bet like kittens that have been like nurtured from day dot and always been sort of looked after and never had to do their own thing. they wouldn't know how to do that. So if shit
No.
hit the fan and they had to survive, they wouldn't know how to go and like to go and get their own food like she does. So
No?
I think that's a good analogy for life. She taught me a lot there, and I think that's another thing as well. I think you can always learn from every opportunity. You can
Yeah.
be inspired by everything, and there's always an opportunity to learn, even when your cat comes and brings you a bit of toast that she found in the garden.
I love it. She's going, that's not buttered all the way to the edge. Could you sort that out, please?
It had buttered like a few days ago by the looks of it. It was like
It's funny. And I do like that analogy, and it's something that actually I think about a lot, because I had to think on my feet as a young person, and because of where I find myself today, my children are far more cosseted than I was, and you think, does that mean that you don't learn to strive? It's something that I worry about, really. I should just tell them when they're 16, could you get out, please, get a job. But it is that thing that you say of that, being open to opportunities, being flexible, adaptable, learning from cats. But that creativity that you had would have just been stifled in like you say, it's by staying at sixth form or by working in a boring office.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, actually, the guy who published The Move, the magazine, James Brown, he always says ambition, his definition of ambition is when, no, hang on, I got that wrong, let me start again. His definition of luck is when ambition is opportunity. And I've always remembered that, and he's taught me a lot of it. It taught me a lot of valuable things, but that, I think, is the one that comes back to me, because lots of people have lots of one and not enough of the other, and never really happens for them. And I think if you've got that ambition and you're always out there looking for opportunities and looking for little gaps that you can fill, or ways that you can make yourself useful, or thinking of things that you do that other people can't do, I think that's a big thing. I do a little bit of mentoring, and that's one thing I always tell young people is, although you might not have a traditional background in the sort of academic sense, there's a lot that you can do that other people can't do because you've had a unique experience, and I think that's really important. So when you do find those opportunities, you make the most of them.
Yeah, I love that, and you made me think there that, because certainly my accent changed when I went into the corporate environment, and it takes a lot of energy to put on that polish, which distracts you from the stuff you're naturally gifted at, potentially.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had an interesting chat. I was on a panel talk a couple of months ago, and there was an interesting guy, older guy, really successful in Adland. And he was like, as soon as I worked out that it was only kind of me getting in my own way, I found confidence, and I realized that people started taking me more seriously because I believed in myself, and so other people believed me. And I sort of, at the time, I agreed to him up to a point, because I think that also, you can have all the confidence in the world, but structural discrimination does exist. There's some things that you just can't, can't change. But I actually think he makes an interesting point, in that confidence. You get that later on in life, if you're from a sort of a working class or non-academic background. It takes you a long time to get that confidence. You have to have a few successes in your career to start believing in yourself. And wouldn't it be amazing if you left school or you left university with that amount of confidence in yourself, which if you go to a private school, you tend to do. So in that time that you're sort of working your way up and feeling comfortable in yourself, it might take 10-15 years for you to get to that point. You're already behind other people who have always had it, so you're kind of you're at a disadvantage. So it would be lovely if you didn't have to do that by making mistakes and doing it yourself.
No, it's just, I don't know, there was so much from sort of things you're saying about school and the area where you grew up, and then stuff like that. It is, and I know people who have their kids in the private system, and so for some of them it's about that. It's about that they will come out ahead in that
Yeah,
sense of how you conduct yourself, how you speak to
yeah.
others, having a network. And it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that.
I
Um,
shouldn't. But if you ask me, that is where the money goes. That's where the
yeah.
money goes. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
Yeah, it's that polish.
yeah.
Yeah, that is what they don't teach you necessarily at state school.
No, no. And I think it wouldn't take too much for some of that to be transferred across. I listened to a really interesting episode of the Social Mobility podcast, and the guest was asked, what would you do, I think, if you could do one thing? And they said just because they had benefited from, so whilst their parents were working class, they had put them into the private school system. And they said the one thing that they would like to see would be to have education just evened out, where everyone get, and I know, I guess that's a massive thing, but people get that same quality of experience, or they come out of it feeling like, I'm ready to go out into the world.
And that is the government line, right? The government line is, and I read this, the education secretary recently said this in response to, there was a conversation about Oxbridge accepting more pupils from working class backgrounds,
Yeah.
or more from state schools. And
Mm.
his thing is like, we have to make sure that state schools are at, rather than quotas, we have to make sure that state schools are at the level of private schools, so that we don't need quotas and everybody's coming out at the same. But why would, I mean, listen, why would they do that? Why would, why would why would you make something that you pay for? Like, these people pay thousands and thousands and thousands to put their
Yeah.
kids in the best private schools. What is their motivation to
Yeah.
devalue them, to make free schools just as good as them? Because then what are they paying for? Like,
Yeah.
why would you trust these people to, and I'm sorry to get too political, but why would you trust the government, who are the product and biggest champions of private schools,
Yeah.
to make them obsolete by making free
Yeah.
schools just as good, so that you can send your kids to any free school and get the same services as you would to people who pay hundreds of thousands?
Yeah.
They're not going to do it. Like, do they think we were born yesterday? Come on.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny actually, what's quite interesting is if I think about, if I speak to people where I grew up, there is just that, I guess, tacit understanding of, well, of course they wouldn't do that. It's like, what was I born yesterday? And there is an element of, I don't know, it's really fascinating to me to, you know, I definitely have a kind of, I live in it's middle class area, and that's what the school intake is pretty much. And there is a lot of, oh, but yeah, that I'm sure that the government will sort this out. There is that difference between, I think that there is that, well, it feels to me like a working class thing of like, we know they're a bunch of jokers. We
Yeah.
wouldn't trust them. Do you think we were born yesterday? And I don't know. It's hard for me to put my finger on, and I guess that's why class is seen as such a contentious topic, or difficult to discuss. But there's definitely differences.
Do you
Um,
know, Tony, it's a hard thing to accept that the people who are supposed to be looking after you actually don't have your best interests at heart. And,
mm,
and that is why I think some people just go along with it, because they want to believe that it's true, because the opposite
yeah,
is just the reality to face.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's true. It is true. Wow. So what do we do about it, Tom? We
Well,
get on and you make your own opportunities.
yeah, but I think that one thing that we try and say to common people is quite a simple thing, that if you're working at a company,
Yeah.
you can just ask, is social mobility, is socio-economic background or class, is that considered in our diversity policy?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time I think people find that it's not. And it's not, and again, it's not a malicious decision. It's just that people don't consider it in the same way as other protected characteristics. In fact, it's not a protected characteristics, but some people would say it should be. But that could be just quite a simple way of starting a conversation and saying, what do we do about this internally, rather than waiting for the government to make policies and do all the rest of it. We can make the change from the inside, from the industry. And if maybe your company's a creative company and there's certain entry-level jobs that require a degree, let's have a discussion. Do we really need that? Are there other ways that we could find talent? Even I once applied to, it was one of the museums or galleries. In fact, it was more than one. I had this problem, but the application process was done via an automated form, and you had to put your education into the form to be able to progress to the next step. So if you didn't have a university degree, if you couldn't put that information in, you couldn't progress to the next step.
Wow.
The assumption was that if you apply for this job, then you have to have this information. Or maybe it was just an oversight when they created the form and they didn't even think, oh, bloody hell, what if people can't fill this section in because they didn't go to university? Because it was just assumed that everybody's been.
Yeah.
Things like that. Maybe let's start having these conversations now.
Yeah, I love that. And you've completely sort of brought us back on track there as I was sort of like taking myself off down a rabbit hole I couldn't find my way out of. But yes, absolutely. And I do agree with that. If I look at some of the work that like the big four, the consulting firms are doing around their social mobility networks, and they use socioeconomic background information when they're looking at their employee mix, and then they're trying to figure out what do they do with that data. So yeah, I think, as you say, instead of waiting for things to change in the education system, industry can step in and say, let's go and speak to kids in state secondary schools. Let's offer work experience that's paid. Or yeah.
There are lots of really good companies, charities, social enterprises who are specifically helping companies sort of tackle socioeconomic diversity. And it's one way. One problem is that people, you can say there are these great companies out there, but how do you even find them? Where do you start? And I would say to those people, get into Common People, drop us a message or join the group and just ask, because there are loads and loads of people out there. I've actually got a little bit of a database of great companies who are doing work and mentorship schemes.
Brilliant.
The rest of it. Yeah. So just drop us a message.
Brilliant. So I'll put the links to how to get in touch with Common People in the show notes. I've just loved talking to you because we've gone very deep and serious, and we've had cats bringing toast in from the garden, which is just like
it's gone quickly. It's an hour.
Is it? Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
thanks, Tom.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thanks.